وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد. Alhamdulillah, instead of our regular series as we do on Thursdays when we talk about the Hadith al-Ahkam, I just wanted to share today a little bit about one of the most influential figures that we have actually in modern American history, who just passed away a few days ago. His janazah was performed yesterday. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon him. And it's interesting, how much of an influence he's actually had on the life of American Muslims in terms of bringing Muslims together, and even some of the organizations you're familiar with. But still, a lot of people may not be familiar with Imam Jamil al-Amin, rahimahullah, and especially knowingly that he was right here in Atlanta, meaning he established the Western Community Masjid, what is now called Community Masjid, where Imam Nadim Ali and some of our other Imams, they're down there as well. He established that community. And he came to Atlanta in the 1970s, and he's done a phenomenal. What he did was phenomenal in that community, and it's been replicated in a few other parts of the United States. If you've heard of Imam Siraj Wahaj, Imam Siraj Wahaj has done similar things where he was, in the north. But I want to share with you just some bullet points about him, and then in the end, inshallah, just talk about what does it take, right? Really, when you look at people like this and you see the kind of impact they have and the kind of actual change they make, that what does it actually take to be in a position of leadership within an Islamic framework, and the kind of things that you have to face in order to really make a change. But he was born. His name was he's famously known before his Islam as H. Rap Brown. And when he was, part of the Black Panthers and these other movements, but his name was Hubert Gerald Brown. He was born in 1943 in Louisiana. He was a part of what was called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and this was a group. Again, this was a part of the Civil Rights Movement, and he was a very important part of that as well. And he was someone that worked in the 1960s, even to help passing some of the Voting Rights Acts and things like that. He was part of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, MFDP. So the Democrats, before, they were very segregated, meaning it was a whites-only party. And this is, again, 1970s, 60s, right? So this is not so long ago. And so they had, the African Americans had their caucus or their group within the Democratic Party, which they pushed their way in to try to make some changes there as well. In 1967, he was elected as the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He came after Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael is a very well-known person in the civil rights movement. He was famously known as Kwame Ture. And, so he was someone that had a huge impact, meaning he was very, very important for the civil rights movement. And right after him, the person that was elected the chairman of this committee was Imam Jamil, right? But again, he was at that time known as H. Rab Brown. And so this is all prior to his Islam. This is prior to his Islam. As a young man, was very active, very involved. And you can see that he was, building up a reputation. And because of that, he became the target of state and federal attention. Meaning the governments wanted to keep an eye on this person, as was the case with other people that were involved in the civil rights movement. And if you haven't already heard of it, the FBI had a program. It was called, anybody know what it was called? Started with Co. Well, this is bad. We need to know this because all the same tactics have been used against the Muslim community before and after 9/11 as well. But it was called COINTELPRO. Right, COINTELPRO. There's a lot of literature on it out there. Those that were part of the civil rights movement, they were victims of this. So Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all these people were on these lists. So the FBI had a program called COINTELPRO, and at that time it was aimed at undermining the Black liberation movement. So they were constantly watching these people, right? Constantly under surveillance. And if this sounds familiar, that's exactly what's been happening in the Muslim community. Even prior to, but especially after 9/11, it's the same exact tactics that they have used. But they would watch them, and they would even try to intimidate them, try to force them into committing some kinds of crimes and things like that. But there was always something they were after. But 1971, so they had him on something and they had him in prison. 1971, he was in Rikers Island in New York. That is where he accepted Islam. And so from H. Rap Brown, he became Jamil Abdullah al-Amin. And in 1976, after his release, he went and performed Hajj. And I think he was still on his parole at the time. The rules might have been different back then, but he went and performed Hajj. And when he came back from his Hajj, he got permission to serve the rest of his parole in Atlanta. So he came from the north, From New York, that area, he came down to Atlanta in 1976. 1979 is, those of you that are familiar with Imam Nadim Ali from the West End Masjid, he's also a well-known counselor in the community. He's a licensed family and therapist counselor as well in the Muslim community, and he serves there at the West End Masjid as well. Imam Nadim Ali came in 1979, and he was with Imam Jamil and Amin from that time onwards, right? And so all of this stuff is fresh history. You can get it right from the mouths of people that are still here and serving the community, and they can tell you directly. And I'll share with you some of what Imam Nadim Ali has shared about his time with Imam Jamil al-Amin. But when they established in the 1970s, that when he came to Atlanta, they established the West End community, and he opened up a grocery store. Imam Jamil opened up a grocery store, and from there he also started giving da'wah and establishing a community. And if you go, and I was just there yesterday as well, if you go to the West End community, you look at it prior to that time, it was infested with drugs, with prostitution. The area was, it had a lot of problems, a lot of issues, right? And again, a lot of these areas in America, there's many of them that have, when people come in and they're selling drugs and they're making hubs out of neighborhoods that are poor, then, this becomes a problem. And so Imam Jamil, rahimahullah, what he did was he actually established patrols. So they came and they established actual patrols, and this is the kind of work they did. They cleaned up that community. And you can find interviews online, the news articles and everything. That Diane Sawyer has interviewed Imam Jamil as well, but they really cleaned up that community. And some of the details that Imam Nadim Ali he shares is that from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., members of the community would keep watch. So they would stand on the street corners, they would keep watch. When they would see activity, they would go and record license plate numbers, or they would go and confront people. If people were selling drugs, they would confront. So they took on this active role of really cleaning up their community. And when I heard about this from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I thought, man, subhanAllah, when we ask people to volunteer for the masjid, it's so hard, right? To try and find volunteers for like one program for the masjid. Imagine being asked to be, volunteer like one or a few days a week to stand guard, for a 5-hour shift or something, to watch your community. But this is the kind of stuff they did. And when you go in that community, you see the love of the people. Even those who are not Muslims, you see the appreciation and the love they have for the Muslims in that neighborhood. And you go there, it's a very safe neighborhood. You walk around and people are saying salam and everything. They did the janazah in al-ghaib. They did it, in a corner in the main street, in the park, and people are walking by, driving by, and it's a very, very safe place. But they literally did it by confronting, right? By confronting people that were doing illegal things, and they were driving them out. Now again, it's funny because the authorities are coming after Imam Jamil at this time to try and frame him and get him for some kind of crime. All the while, he is cleaning up crime in his community, right? He's wiping it out and cleaning it up and moving it out of his community. He was also, in the 1990s, he co-founded and co-convened what was called the National Majlis Ashura. And the local Majlis Ashura, he was the first head of that as well. But this was a council that was representing broad coalition of U.S. Muslim organizations. So you guys know ISNA, right? Islamic Society of North America. You know ICNA, Islamic Circle of North America. You know the community of Imam Warith al-Din Muhammad, rahimahullah. And then you had the national Ummah, that was his group, Imam Jamil's group as well. And so he brought these diverse groups together, right? ISNA and ICNA, largely from made up of Muslims from Southeast Asia, the Warith al-Din Muhammad community, African American community. He brought these groups together at a national level, their leadership. And they had a national Majlis Ashura. Allahu A'lam if it's still around today, but they had a national Majlis Ashura. And who was the first Emir of that group? Was Imam Jamil al-Amin, rahimahullah. Right? So this is a significant person who played a very significant role in uniting Muslim organizations around America. And again, we may not have known all these things about him, right? But again, it's such a quiet person, working quietly, and then you begin to understand why the authorities are coming at him so hard in the way that they are. He engaged in community peace building efforts. He went around the country. He was negotiating peace treaties between street gangs in different neighborhoods, bringing peace to other communities as well. And he even went and he did some work to give relief to the Bosnian Muslims as well. So he was working at a global level as well. As a very well respected figure, and again someone that was able to go into troubled areas and bring peace. And subhanAllah, this is something that you think about what the Prophet ﷺ did when he was able to put the black stone in the corner of the Kaaba, keep everybody from beating their throats and fighting, right? It takes a special kind of person to be able to go into groups where people are already violent with each other and then to bring them to a level where you can stop the fighting, stop the killing, and have people actually have a sense of peace. And so who knows how many lives may have potentially be saved because of this effort, and we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to reward him for each one of that. But we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Man ahyaha فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. Right? Whoever saves a life, it is like he has saved the life of all of humanity. And so to do this kind of work, to drive away crime, to drive away drugs, to drive away murder, all this stuff from a community, to be engaged in good things where you're going around the country and creating peace between warring gangs and all this kind of stuff, it really doesn't make sense that someone like this would be guilty of the kinds of things that they tried to put against the Imam. If you look at his history of how he was targeted and constantly charges brought up against him for various things, he was never successfully charged, from what I understand, of a federal crime. The FBI had a whole file on him, 18,000 pages. 18,000 pages the FBI had on Imam Jamil and Amin, rahimahullah. 14,000 of those, his lawyers, but his wife was his lawyer, his children, his son was his lawyer as well. They're attorneys. They said about 14,000 of those pages are after he became Muslim. After the whole engagement in the civil rights movement, at 14,000 pages on, what are they writing in those pages? You can imagine. What are they possibly documenting about him in those pages? There were so many charges that were brought up against him. He fought for years and years and years, back and forth in jail and coming, doing this, being arrested from here and there. But there were so many charges that were eventually dropped, meaning they were trying to get him on something, and then it wouldn't work out after a year, so they would drop the charges. They would do this and do that. So you see the history. If you look it up, the Imam Jamil Action Network, if you look up Imam Jamil Action Network, it has his whole entire history of what he dealt with the legal system, right? And so they were constantly coming after him for something. And even after he came to Atlanta, they were after him. And again, one of the reasons we understand why these agencies come after people, Imam Nadim, he's mentioned this as well. When you challenge the status quo, right? When you're changing things that are, that the way that people want them to be. So there is an element, and these are just some of the truths we have to dig and do our research and understand. But there is an intentional element that wants people to be hooked on drugs, right? Otherwise, why would they be so readily available? You don't think we have the real kinds of systems to stop these things from happening? We absolutely do. As a side point, right here in Johns Creek is one of the most wealthiest cities in Georgia. Johns Creek is one of the most wealthiest cities in Georgia. They call it one of the safest cities, right? It tops all these lists, and we share that information as well. But it's also number one when it comes to deaths by opioid addiction overdose. Johns Creek, Georgia, the wealthiest city. At the same time, you have all these beautiful things happening, and at the same time, quietly, people are fighting their addiction with drugs right here in Johns Creek, Alpharetta, the number one in the state of Georgia, where you have people overdosing in all these $1 million homes and all this kind of stuff. So there's a real problem that's happening here. And where is it coming from, right? And it's the safest city in Georgia, but how are you getting all these things in here, right? But there is an intentional effort to try and keep people hooked on certain types of things. It lines the pockets of some people. So when somebody walks in and starts cleaning up a neighborhood, when somebody steps in and starts getting people who are not necessarily as disciplined, but they start giving them discipline in their lives. They start avoiding things that are sinful and harmful to themselves, because they have come to something that is better, right? So, and this is what the prophets did. This is how Islam spread. Anytime this happened, people always came and opposed it. Why? Because what you're challenging is you're challenging the hard work of shaitan. Inna shaitana lakum aduwwun mubin. Shaitan is a clear enemy. And so when you're coming now, shaitan has promised Allah, I'm going to misguide these people, the sons of Adam. I'm going to misguide them. And so that's what he's working on. So, all this, drugs and prostitution, all this kind of stuff that's in these communities, there is an active element of shaitan and his army working to try and do this. So when you oppose it, obviously, those forces are going to come after you as well. And so you see constantly that they were coming after him. In 1975, through an appeal, his attorneys obtained records showing that he was listed as a target in COINTELPRO, meaning the government had deliberately sought to try and come up with charges against him. They wanted to lock him away so that he couldn't do the kind of stuff that he was doing. Again, who wants to lock away a person who's changing the community for good? But there are everything that they have charged him with. His lawyers have always found inconsistencies. That the latest thing was a murder of those deputies, and the deputy, the way he described the person that shot him, does not meet the description of Imam Jamil and Amin. You may not even know this, but the person that actually did it confessed. He was in jail for another crime, and he confessed and gave details. They ignored that confession. Meaning somebody confessed to the crime that they have charged him for, and he's doing his life sentence or whatever in jail. Somebody else has confessed to the crimes, gave details, meets the description that the deputy gave, etc., etc., but that confession was never accepted. They didn't accept it. They just left it away. They continued to charge him. These are the kinds of things you see when you look at the details of the case of Imam Jamil and Amin rahimahullah. But this is what he had to face. I mean, they wanted to lock him away. And this is one of the realities we have to understand. You see this happening before your eyes right now. What happened with Sami, right? Brother Sami, where he's Sami Hamdi, right? He's going around. He's giving these powerful talks. He's mobilizing the Muslim community and other communities to actively stand up and speak against the efforts to support Zionism and all this kind of stuff. And what do? They come and get him, put him away in jail, and then they end up deporting him. They create the way to deport him, and then they deport him. Right? This happened right before our very eyes. You saw this happening right here in front of you. So there's an active element of people that when you start trying to create a change, that these people will come in and they will start to do this as well. So it's something that's very important to understand. And I'll close with this, inshallah ta'ala. Again, we encourage you to go and do your own research about Imam Jamil. He's a local imam, right? He was one of our local imams. And you have his community, and you go to his community. You can drive, 30, 40 minutes downtown, and you can talk to Imam Nadeem Ali. You can talk to the imams of his community. You can talk to the elders who were working with him to clean up this community yourself and see what they've done. You can see this stuff. This is living history before your eyes. But what's really amazing is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses people with a different past, right? So when we try to raise ourselves and raise kids, we want them to be as pure as possible from the day they're born until the day that they are older. But you see the kind of people, like you've seen in American Muslim history, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, people that came were already before their Islam, they were already very tough and go-getter types of people. Meaning if they believed something, they would sacrifice everything to make sure that they were working towards what they believed was true. And this attitude is what's really important. You find it in amongst the Sahaba, Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiyallahu anhu. What did Umar ibn al-Khattab do the day he became Muslim? What was one of the last actions he did before he took his shahada? What did he do? He was going to kill the Prophet ﷺ, but before he did that, he actually hurt somebody. Who did he hurt? His own sister and her husband. He went to their house. He saw them. They were reading Quran, and the qari that was teaching them Quran, and he beat them up in their house. He bloodied them, and they wouldn't reject what they were doing. And he was so moved by this that he finally sat down and said, "Read to me what you're reading." And his sister said, "What?" She said, "No, go and clean yourself. You're impure. You can't listen to the Quran in this state." And then he goes to the Prophet ﷺ, right? Who would imagine that a person that is so adamantly opposing the Prophet ﷺ can go and hurt his own sister, would within minutes change into one of the most important personalities that we would need in the history of Islam, right? The conquest that he did and so on and so forth. But the minute he changed, that was it. The minute he changed, he still had that same fervor. And this was the same Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when they came time to migrate from Mecca to Medina, everybody was quietly packing and leaving, secretly as well as they could and so on. And so even the Prophet ﷺ, he left quietly, he left secretly, etc. The one man who left in the open, he went to the Kaaba, and Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he stood in the vicinity of the Kaaba, and he said what? He said, whoever wants that their mother should lose their son, then I'm going to make the hijrah, I'm going to Medina. Whoever wants that their mother should lose their son, try and come and stop me. He went and basically challenged every man in the city and said, go ahead and try and stop me, right? And so Allah Azza wa Jal creates certain people like this Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu, who was harming the Muslims, fighting against them, caused them losses in battle. But the minute he becomes Muslim, becomes one of the most important contributors to Islam. And so you see people like this. We have to understand that sometimes maybe we're not moved by people because of what we know about their past, right? And we know that Imam Jamil before his fast was involved in certain things, and whatever the case may be. But the minute he accepts Islam, he already has that attitude. This is a living example you just saw before your eyes. He has that attitude of if something is right, it is right, and I will give up everything to do what is right. And he came, subhanAllah, and he changed his community. And this is what it takes. It takes that kind of attitude where you're willing to sacrifice everything. And so a lot of us, we live in our bubbles. We want to pretend that practicing and preaching Islam is going to be safe. It's not going to be safe. حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِهِ وَحُفَّتِ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, Jannah, it is surrounded by complications. It is surrounded by difficulties. Meaning you want to get to Jannah, you have to cross through that border where there's going to be challenges and difficulties. People are going to oppose you. People are going to hurt you. People are going to try and, like you see with the Imam, they're going to try and, to frame you and come up with all kinds of charges against you, etc., etc. You're going to have to walk through that in order for you to get to Jannah. And Jahannam is surrounded by desire. All the good things you can chase after this dunya, you can go after it. No one's going to stop you, but that's what's going to lead you to the hellfire. But subhanAllah, you see this. This is another living example. We think about in the past, like we talk about Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, rahimahumullah. But he was living up until the past few days. He's 80-something years old. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him. But he did amazing things. The impact he left in the community, which is literally right down the road. You can go there, you can connect with these imams, and you can talk to them as well. And like I said, talk to their elders, see what it takes. And again, bring that fervor back to our community. SubhanAllah, if there's anything, and this is a challenge for us, if people are dying left and right from overdose in this community, then what are the Muslims that come with the truth message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that can actually help people out of this misery? What are we doing in terms of like trying to address this issue and trying to give these people a solution? Because all these other solutions are coming up with are temporary. There's one permanent solution, and that is La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meaning you're willing to give up anything in this dunya for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet sallallahu ended, alcoholism in his community through La ilaha illallah. Imam Jamil has ended, the drugs and all this stuff in his community through La ilaha illallah. And so there's a lot of solutions that we can provide with these people if we go and we give them this message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, invite them to this Islam, and then show them through practice and discipline how you can change your life. And that is the one thing that Islam really does. And that's why you see, by the way, within the prison system, Imam Jamil accepted Islam in the prison system. The prison system in the United States of America is producing Muslims like you cannot imagine. People are becoming Muslims at a rate that you cannot imagine. Every Ramadan, we get a request to send Quran and prayer rugs to even, there's a remote prison, and it's a female prison somewhere in Georgia. We get requests to provide prayer rugs and Qurans for them. And it comes from the prison. We need help. We need Qurans. We need prayer rugs. We need to be able to do our prayers and this and that. There's a need for chaplains to go and serve the Muslims within these prison systems. And it's overwhelming. And I know brothers who have come out of there as well. And the one group, if you know anything about the American prison system, it's a very racist system, meaning once you enter the prison system, you got to find your ethnicity and you got to stick with them. That is your survival tool. The only exception to that is the Muslim community within the prison system. There is no race or ethnicity. It doesn't matter if you're a Muslim, that's a whole different community. You will be protected by your brothers and sisters just because you are a Muslim. Doesn't matter if you're white, black, or anything else. Outside of that, if you're white, you go with the whites. If you're black, you go with the blacks. If you're Hispanic, you go with the Hispanics, right? If you're Desi Arab like us, Allah protect you. If you don't have Islam, then you're going to be, you're not going to have that much protection. But if you're a Muslim, everything else gets put aside. That becomes its own community, and there's a huge respect for the Muslim community within even the prison system because they are people of discipline. And that is the one thing that is consistent about it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless Imam Jamil and all the work that he's done. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to bless the community of Imam Jamil, to allow us to learn from these examples. And alhamdulillah, we try our best to stay connected with the Imams and to learn from them the things that they have done in their communities that have really brought about a change. There's another Imam Bilal in Gainesville. You guys might know him through Janazah services. Imam Bilal has done amazing things in his community, a small community in Gainesville, Georgia. You go out there, and I've been out there with Imam Bilal, you just stand on the street with him, people drive by, they stop their cars, they get out to say hi. They're not even Muslim, they stop and they get out to say hi, appreciate him, because they also help clear out drugs behind the building in the masjid and all this kind of stuff. So there's people that are doing real amazing work right here, and we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to allow us to have that same impact in our communities, because we have different problems, but we still have problems we have to address. Before I close, also a request for dua to our brother Naeem, his father, who is very, very ill right now in this moment. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal, give him relief, give him shifa, give his family sabr in this difficult time. These are as people get older. Brother Naeem has told us himself that it could be a matter of days, weeks, months. Allahu A'lam. But we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give him relief. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to strengthen the family, strengthen their iman, and to use this as a reminder for all of us as well. That this is, we've seen people pass at young ages, we've seen people pass at old ages, but that time is going to come for all of us, and what we see before us as well what are we going to do with the time that we have in this dunya? We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to allow us to use literally whatever, whatever tools He has given us, whatever skills He has given us, to serve Him in some way, shape, or form. And you don't have to be a student of knowledge, a sheikh, imam, whatever, to serve your community. And that is, again, the most important message. Just like I'm not going to call you to stand from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. But when we have things, the masjid is here, the house of Allah Azza wa Jal is here. Find a way to be involved. Whatever masjid is your local masjid, find a way to be involved. If they're not giving you a way to be involved, come and create a way to be involved. But be involved in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us from His blessings. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum assalam.